So many moms feel stuck and isolated, like they've got to keep it all together and can't say how hard it really is. On Let's Get Real, we talk about the real stuff, motherhood, mental health, and everything in between, so you don't feel like you have to carry it alone anymore. Because in order to heal, we have to get real. If you're feeling overwhelmed, grab the Overwhelmed Mom's Guide. It's totally free and made to help you feel like yourself again. The link is in the show notes. Let's jump in. Addiction doesn't just impact one person. It ripples through families, childhoods, marriages, and motherhood. So many women grow up in chaos, promise themselves that they'll never repeat the cycle, and then find themselves facing the same patterns of pain. It leaves women wondering, how do I heal my story without carrying the shame of where I came from? And how do I hold hope when someone I love is struggling? Today, we're joined by Jennifer Chase, a woman in long-term recovery, the daughter of an alcoholic, the mother of a recovering addict, and now a life coach who helps families heal together. Jennifer's story is one of breaking generational cycles, reclaiming identity, learning boundary setting, and choosing self-trust after years of shame and codependency. Her perspective is honest and filled with hope for anyone walking through addiction. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here today, and I can't wait to jump into this topic on addiction, recovery, healing from that, and the generational cycles that we see played out in different people's lives and their families. So thanks so much for being here.
Oh, I'm just so excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, as we are getting started, I would love it if you could share a little bit of your own story and what has led you to do the work that you do today.
My story starts as many of us who kind of have this childhood trauma of addiction. So I am the youngest of three children. I have an older sister and an older brother. And when I think about those relationships, I think about, they really got along with one another, but not so much with me. So I was kind of the third wheel out in those relationships. I have a mom who, if my mom speaks English, I speak German. I don't know if some of your listeners can understand. We don't communicate the same way. We don't feel the same way. It was kind of a miss, my mom's 82 and I still sort of would describe the relationship that way. And my dad, if my mom wasn't my person, my dad absolutely was my person. My dad was an alcoholic. And so you never really knew what you were going to get when he walked in the door after a day of work, whether he was going to be my guy or whether he was going to be intoxicated and angry and even sometimes emotionally or physically abusive. And so in my house, there was a common denominator to every single one of those relationships. And the common denominator was me, right? If I could just be different, if I could just be quieter or less emotional or happier or something, then these relationships that I had at home would feel different. And unfortunately, I'm also part of a statistic that says 1 out of every 4 girl and 1 out of every 4 little boy that's kind of raised in the dynamic of addiction is being sexually abused. And I was being sexually abused by my mom's dad. See, in my family, I've been able to find 4 generations down both sides. So 4 generations down my mom's side and 4 generations down my dad's side of the disease of addiction. And most of that was alcoholism. I had a grandma that was an opiate addict in like the 50s before that was kind of a thing to be.
Wow.
So my family danced in this thing called alcoholism. It was very normalized. I also grew up in a pretty affluent home. My dad was a successful businessman. My grandfather that was abusing me was a very successful man in the community that he lived. And so I had all the things, right? My grandfather had a house on the lake in a little town that we would vacation at in the summertime. And I was born in London, England, and have lived all over the country. And, from the outside looking in, I had a pretty blessed life. And yet what was happening inside felt very different. That dichotomy was very confusing to me. It just really, again, spoke to that I was the problem. Why aren't you appreciative? Why aren't you happy? Why isn't this enough? And so it was very challenging. And I think one of the things that I learned from my childhood was that I was never going to be like them, right? I was never going to have an alcohol problem. I was never going to raise my children the way that my parents had raised theirs. I really looked at my parents' inability to break the chains of addiction as just pure weakness. Like, I had more courage in my pinky finger than they had in their whole body. And I was very aware of it. At the age of 4 was the first time I remember barricading myself in my bedroom. So I took all like my record player and stuffed animals and belongings and put them up against the door. And at the age of 4 was my first attempt to kind of keep the outside world from getting in. I was going to be okay if I could just keep them from getting into my space, right? And what I know now is at the age of 4 is the first time that I learned how to isolate. And so, the journey was a long one, but I just so distinctly remembering from a very young age that this was never going to be me.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that is such a wild picture too that you painted in there's just so many layers to it. I think about how early on as a child being in family dynamics like this and the situations you found yourself in, how much it shapes our identity and how much shame comes in and it tries to tell it well, there must be something wrong with me. We internalize this so much and it really does shape so much of how we see ourselves. And then also as a kid, if we cannot experience safety because the adults that are supposed to protect us are not, like the situations that you found yourself in, then we're trying to figure out how to keep ourselves safe. And so that is wild that you can remember at 4 doing that, to be like, how can I protect myself and keep myself safe? The other thing I would actually love to explore and talk a little bit more about, because I haven't had the chance to have a conversation like this with someone. However, it has come up constantly, is that dichotomy of being raised in an affluent family and then having these addictions and the sexual abuse and all these like dark secrets that can easily get hidden, and they just grow because from the outside, so many people, how I feel about what some of the thoughts I've had is just like money, affluence, any of that. It's very distracting. And it's big, it can be very shiny, and it's like, it just almost keeps your eye off of the darkness that is actually happening. And then people somehow justify that. They're like, well, or they don't believe you and they doubt you, as if somehow money keeps people from doing sick things. So can you talk a little bit more about that, as you have personally, at one point that was confusing, but what is some of the clarity that you've had around that?
Well, a lot of the clarity is what you speak of, right? There's power in money. And there's power in your status in society. I think about this from 2 different directions, because my grandfather, if you go to a place where I live in Boise, Idaho, you go to one of the country clubs in town and his picture is on the wall, right?
Wow.
He helped build it. He was, again, a pretty affluent person in the community. And my mom, who through years of healing through this process, has also realized that she was abused as a child. But my mom has memories like the neighbors will have just picked up and moved away in the middle of the night, right?
Oh, wow.
And we've put, and again, no concrete evidence of this, but when you put 2 and 2 together, right, there's some suggestion that maybe he was abusing other children. And it was, when you talk about money and affluence, like, and especially during that time, there was no, I'm going to go to the police. It's just that I'm going to pack my family up and move out of town to keep them safe, right? Because there was no hope of anything happening if you were to tell the police or B, confront him, or, whatever that looked like. And so, I think there was lots of that going on. With my own dad, I remember, this is, again, such a crazy story, but again, in the context that my dad was my guy, right? I loved my dad. I showed up when I was in the 5th grade with eye makeup, like eyeshadow that I had created to look like a black eye. And I had gone to school and I had said, my dad hit me. which I always in hindsight look at, it's like, why my dad? I loved him. But what I was trying to do was to get any adult to get down on my level and say, sweet baby girl, what is going on in your house? But because of who my family looked like from the outside, right? Those questions were then turned to me, which is like, what's wrong with that one? Right? The other two seem to be fine. The family is great. They do all the things. My parents were involved in the community and in youth sports and all the things. And so it was always then directed to what's wrong with this one. And that kind of communication just fueled this sort of shame inside of me and this unlovability, if you will, this unworthiness inside of me, when really what I was trying to do was like basically scream from the rooftops. Can somebody see what's going on in this house?
Right. Yeah. And in those situations at home where you're taught to deny what you see, what you hear, reality, you don't know how to come out and just say to another adult, you don't know how to directly say that I need help with this. So it's through makeup, through any form in any way, because it's like you lost your voice early on and you're like, I have no idea.
What I think is really important too is for any listeners out there that's starting to untangle some things that have happened in their childhood. One of the things that I struggled with that kept me silent for so long was that I had these fleeting memories, right? They weren't like concrete, I can tell you exactly what happened when it happened. It was things like sheets and carpet and the grooming that would be used to, and what that looked like. But I couldn't specifically tell you this is what happened to me at this moment. And so when I didn't have those memories or fleeting memories, I couldn't, especially as a child, communicate what was actually going on in my body.
Right.
And without those, I used to pray at night, God, please, I can handle it. Please tell me what happened to me specifically so that people would believe me, so that I could articulate it. And so even as, a fourth grader or a fifth grader or a sixth grader, as I'm trying to wrestle with that just created more shame for me. That just created more like nobody's going to believe. They already don't believe me, but they're really not going to believe me because I'm like, well, I can tell you what the bed sheets looked like. Right.
Yes.
And so that was even harder in those circumstances.
Oh yeah. I could see that because you're having slivers of memories. They're just slivers. And then as what we know now with like neuroscience and all the things, that's actually the way our brain tries to protect ourselves from trauma. There's a reason for it, but we don't know that, especially as kids. And and then if our parents haven't done any of the healing work, they're not going to know any of that either. And so then when you're in that place of being like, I have these fragmented memories, it's hard to believe it yourself, to then work up the courage to be like, well, if I'm struggling, if I'm doubting my own reality and what I've experienced, then like, how could I possibly trust that somebody else will believe me? So I could totally see that, would be very, very, very challenging and just feeling like you're stuck and like, how do I get the help that I desperately need? But you're trying with all your might.
Well, and what really shaped that for me was when again, 4 was really pivotal in this process for me. But I remember at the age of 4, I was sitting on the toilet in the bathroom. My mom was doing my hair, and I was trying to articulate to her that I had something going on inside. And again, from a place of her not understanding what was necessarily going on, but also from her own experiences. I was trying to communicate this. I said, Mom, I have this like funny feeling inside of me. And my mom's response to that was, everybody has that. And so again, I thought that this was a me problem, right? I felt like I just wasn't dealing with life the way that everybody else deals with life. I was just bad at this thing called life, that everybody had these feelings. I just was bad at dealing with them. And so that really created, generations really for me, like decades of this mindset that this is a me problem.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And even just hearing that from your own mom, it's interesting because it's like, I guess now, and as you can like reflect back and seeing, well, that's a pattern. I had that.
Yeah.
This is how I internalize this. And yet there's these generational cycles, the generational trauma that we go through. So I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about that. What is generational trauma? What does it look like to break out of it? Why is it so hard for people to break out of it? If you can dive into that, that
I
would
would
be.
love to. So quickly again, I spoke about the generation with addiction in my family, but also the generations of sexual abuse. So my grandfather, and he had a twin brother, and both of them abused children. So you have to make some assumptions that they were probably also abused, right? So let's say it started there, which probably didn't. That would be 4 generations of sexual abuse on top of the generations of addiction in my home. And so that was normal. Like, it's wild to say that it's normal. It's not that the sexual abuse was normal, but the grooming was normal. And the responses to keeping secrets were normal. And this undertow, if you will, of something's going on, but we don't talk about it, right? And so that was just the sexual abuse. But on top of with the substance, it was like alcohol. I don't remember a day. My dad lost his life to alcoholism in 2015. And of course, I didn't live with him all the way up to that time. But in my childhood, I don't remember a day where my dad didn't drink alcohol. And this is the thing. My dad was very successful. He's one of those like functional alcoholics, if you will, right? Which I tend to think can be more challenging than somebody that's burning it all down, because they have all of these reasons why, well, I provide for my family and I do all of these things and I just like to have a drink at night or whatever it is. And my grandfather, same thing. And so there was this idea that alcohol was just part of society, part of adulthood, really, right? Everybody did it. I think the things that I was extra sensitive to was the driving drunk. I remember so distinctly being in the back car with my sober mother sitting in the passenger seat and my dad driving us drunk, and me thinking to myself, that is never like she didn't have it. This was a little girl's perspective, but you don't have enough courage to even get into an argument with him to keep me safe. And he doesn't even care if I'm safe, right? And I'm beginning at such a young age realizing, do it. I'm going to do this better than you've done it. My children, if I should ever have them, are never going to have to deal with this. And I was the mindset I had for a long time. I ended up getting married and having 2 small babies. And I was a stay-at-home mom at the time. I enjoyed everything about my life. My marriage was very strong. And then one Friday evening, I unfortunately was diagnosed with a hemorrhaging brain tumor. And
oh my gosh.
Was given about 12 hours to live if we didn't go in and fix it. And so they went into emergency surgery and removed that brain tumor. But when they removed it, because of all the hemorrhaging, they caused pretty massive nerve damage in the back of my head. And that is what led me to chronic pain. And I share this story because I just want people maybe that don't understand what it's like to be an addict's brain to understand. So I was in my bed about 2 weeks away from surgery. I could hear my family out in the living room. We were one of those families where like balls were being thrown and probably it was just chaos in my home. And they were playing a game and I'm in my bed. High, I was taking at the time as directed. And I said out loud, as though there were another 10 people sitting in that room with me, where the hell has this been my whole life? It was the solution to all of it. It was the solution to being sexually abused, to having a mom that wasn't your person, to your dad being an alcoholic, to your siblings not liking you, to just almost dying and having to say goodbye. It was the first time in all of my 29 years that I felt like I fit in my skin. I felt like I could finally take a deep breath and breathe.
Whoa.
And that, I speak to people that don't understand what it's like to have an addict brain. Like, that was the last day that I had choice.
Interesting.
And you talk about generations, and this is what's so important, is I haven't met an addict in my life, and I've met a few, who started to use substance because their intent was to become an addict and to burn their whole life down and to disappoint people that love them and to ruin relationships and abandon their children. Nobody starts using substance with that in mind. People start using substance as a solution to something.
Yes.
And this is why generationally it becomes problematic for a couple of reasons. One is biologically, right? I knew, and I think from an early age, that I had the biology for this thing. And so I lived my life with the hyper awareness that I was not going to become an alcoholic. Even when I overdrank in college, it was something that I was hyper aware of and understood. Again, because all I wanted to do was break the chains of this thing. So I was hyper aware and did not drink alcohol very often to excess because I was so aware. But what happened with opiates is they creeped into my life and they were prescribed. I was taking them. I mean, all my entire addiction, I took them prescribed. It was in the middle of, early 2000s when the opioid epidemic was at its height. And I was just prescribed all of these medications, but I wasn't hyper aware of prescribed substance necessarily, right? And so when I started to use them and all of a sudden I could breathe, I was going to be okay. Like it was the first time that my nervous system in 29 years felt like it just took a second, right? It was just like, we can let our foot off the gas for a second. And that's why this thing generationally can become so problematic is when we're raised in it, we have these gaping wounds inside of us, and we just need a solution to fix the wound. On top of the biology.
Yes, exactly. That is such, just you sharing this story, I feel like adds layers to this and paints this picture of where somebody who hasn't necessarily experienced this, or maybe they have, but from a family member, but they can't possibly understand why. Yeah. And there is a reason for this. There's some form of relief that happens. And when you had said, where has this been all my life? Do you remember what you felt? So you said like relief, because there's some sense of the amount of pain that you had been carrying for so many years, most of your life, and not having anybody be able to meet you in that, to talk through it and just internalizing it, carrying it with you, holding this, that is very heavy. And it's like you're bleeding out the whole time. And you've just needed some sense of reprieve, relief, somebody to help with the pain because you've felt that every day to some different varying degrees. And then to finally have something to give your mind, your body a break and be like, oh my gosh, I can finally experience a sense of calm and peace, even if it's just for a moment, or even if it's like a false sense of that. Yeah. But that's so desperately what you've needed. And that's what it's like you're searching for something. So it makes a lot of sense.
Well, I don't know. Can you so I think in stories and pictures, and when I think about what that felt like, I liken it to, do you remember, I don't remember what year it was on Christmas, there was a tsunami in anyway, there was a tsunami, right? And people, and you see pictures of this, and people are trying to survive and hold on to things and find their loved ones. And that's what my life felt like that trauma, that heightened fight or flight, the nervous system being on steroids. That's what my whole life felt. And when I took those opiates, it was like the water receded. And I realized that me and my family were alive and we were going to be okay. And there was that moment of peace. That's what opiates felt like to me. Finally, I did not have to be in this fight or flight. Finally, I could breathe. Finally, I was going to be okay. I had been searching for something for 29 years. And here it was given to me. It was prescribed to me. The doctor said that I could take this, right? In fact, I needed to take this for my medical condition. And I never wanted to burn it all down. I wanted more than anything for my children to have a different life than I had been given. Nothing was more important to me, right? And it was never, with everything in me, I never wanted to burn it down. But again, because that's the way this thing works, when I got sick, my kids were 2 and 5. And when I got sober, they were 18 and 21. So I did exactly what I didn't want to do. I absolutely burned it down. I absolutely almost killed my kids in a car like my dad had, right? I absolutely had done everything that I said I was not going to do in the process of my addiction. And unfortunately, when my son was a senior in high school, I learned that my opiates had also become his solution. And I had inadvertently, of course, but had become my son's drug dealer. Mm-hmm. And so not only did I not break the chains of this thing, but I ended up actually adding a link. And again, from somebody who grew up saying this was never going to be me, it still was me.
Yes.
And I still wasn't the end of the road when we're talking about generationally walking through this thing and healing. And so I share all of that from a place of vulnerability, especially as I share, parts of my son's story, because I want people to know that the only way out of this is to heal. I'm a quote girl, and I have a whole wall of quotes behind me. Mm. One of the quotes is by Joseph Campbell that says, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek."
That's really good.
I could have avoided all of this had I understood that I needed to have enough courage to walk inside of the cave. But unfortunately, I didn't until life was so bad, right? The consequences were so heavy that it was, the benefits of this thing had outweighed, benefits had outweighed the consequences for a very, very, very long time. But it wasn't until that flipped that I was like, well, I might as well go into this thing you call a cave and see if we can heal. And unfortunately, it was far too late, and way too many people were affected.
My gosh, yeah. And just like what you're talking about, it's all too common, and it's such a slippery slope too, because I think it's easy to get focused on one form of addiction and be like, this is the one that was most prevalent. This is where it helps to name and identify, okay, it's alcohol. Like, this is it. And you were so aware of that, which was very helpful to not get caught up. But then we don't realize how many other forms of addiction there are that can grab us and get a hold of us, especially when it's something like with opiates where it's prescribed. You're told, like, there's this permissibility of it, right? So what are some of the misconceptions that you hear from people that you do help in the healing process about healing, about recovery? What are some of those misconceptions that they...
Well, I will die on this hill, which is splitting hairs about addiction is harmful, right? One of my big things with AA is that it's like I have to announce myself as an alcoholic, but to me, is an addiction. And so one of the misconceptions that I hear from people, especially I work with families a lot, and a lot of them that have codependency. And codependency is the exact same experience neurologically as using alcohol or opiates or cocaine, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that that's the misconception, is that substance is the problem. And substance is absolutely not the problem. It's the solution to the problem. Whereas codependency is also the solution to the problem. And, yes, and so we can talk about exercise or food. We can talk about excess of food or eating disorders or gambling or staying busy all the time or they're all exactly the same, which is I'm doing whatever I can to survive and not have to go inside of my cave and do the real work, right? Mm-hmm. I'm making every decision out of fear. I'm, just numbing all the time. And it's a different, and sometimes people use it that's more socially acceptable, right? Like codependency is more socially acceptable than cocaine, but they're doing the exact same thing. And so I think that's a really big misconception, is that the addict is the problem right? The dynamic is the problem. Typically, lots of people have some form of addiction or compulsive thinking that is put this family's dynamic into a place where we're all reacting and making decisions out of fear and to just survive.
That's so good. I'm really, really glad that you explained this, because it is easy to get caught up in the thing and not realize the thing is, it's actually, it's not really about that. It's about the thing it's about whatever is going on internally inside of us, that multiple things are trying to fix that don't really fix it, but to actually deal with what's going on internally. And realize, I think that was like a big thing that blew my mind when I learned that there are many, many different ways that we medicate ourselves to try and numb, escape our life, not feel, not deal with the stuff, not go in the cave. Like, I was shocked. Like, it can be food, it can be work, it can be codependency, it can be relationships, it could be so many things, which was shocking. So that is really helpful. On the topic of codependency, how do you define that? Like, and how can someone tell if they are losing themselves while trying to help someone who's in another form of an addiction?
So I always ask somebody to look, I'm not going to tell you you're codependent, but I'm going to ask you this question and it'll give you a pretty good idea, right? If I say to you, when your addicted loved one or your child maybe doesn't even have a substance, but just in general, when that person is good, are you good? And when they're bad, are you bad? Oh, they'll be like, oh my gosh, Jennifer, yes, right? If you're listening right now and you're like, yep, there might be a pretty good chance, right, that you are codependent. And codependency just means, right, that my happiness is tied or enmeshed in somebody else's life experience. And the tricky part about codependency with our own children is that there is a period of time, specifically as mothers, where it is our job to keep them alive. Literally, right, when they're born.
Yes.
Like, we have to feed them, we have to, like, we do all the things. And for many years, we have to keep them alive. And then there is this tipping point where, as a mom, I now have to start letting them experience things and gain the confidence to keep themselves alive. But oftentimes, our worth is tied to it. Our identity is tied to it. Our purpose is tied to it. And so we ride this trajectory that I am in charge of their happiness. I give the example. So in my story, right, I was woefully underprotected as a child. And so that was, my children were never not going to feel protected. They were never going to say, like, where was my mom when I was going through this, right? So I went from one side of the pendulum of being underprotected to swinging that pendulum so far the other way that my children didn't even have to lift a finger. They didn't have to do anything hard, right? If somebody needed to be talked to, if something needed to be fixed, whatever it was, I did it, right? And I did it in the guise that I was helping them, but really I was trying to make sense of my own childhood and my own life. I was doing it for me. And what I've learned is that both ends of that spectrum, whether it was the one that I had or the one that my children had, were equally as traumatizing and detrimental.
Wow.
Right?
Can you explain a little bit how this side of that pendulum swing is also traumatizing? It is still detrimental to your kids.
So detrimental. And I didn't start doing this work until after I got sober. But again, I talk in pictures, so I'm going to share this. It was like when I got sober and I realized the damage that I had done, right? And when I got sober, again, my kids were 18 and 21. And so they were older, yes, but there was still room for their growth, right? There was still opportunities for them. And what it felt like, and this is 100% as accurate as I can be, it felt like I pushed them into a pond of lava and said, so sorry, wish I could help you get out of that. I know that you have zero coping skills and you have no understanding how to get out of it because I'm the one that's gotten you out of it your whole life. I recognize that, but I can't get you out of it. In fact, I can't even give you a ladder or a rope. I'm just going to stand over here and cheer for you. That's what it felt like, right? because I had given them no skills. It's interesting.
Right.
My daughter is now 29, and every once in a while she'll call me and she'll be like, I need my 2014 mom. Because there's still times where she wants me to come and fight the battles for her because I did not equip them for it. Right. And so basically I handcuffed them, which is one, see, again, we're talking about this pendulum as a child. It's one thing when you don't allow them to figure out and have the skills to fight their own battles when they're 3. It's another thing when they're 15. It's a whole nother thing when they're 30 or 35. And it's my job as a mom to appropriately do that on this trajectory of their life, but I did not. They didn't fight one damn battle on their own ever until the day that I got sober. And so, you know, why I say that is as traumatizing as what I experienced is because neither of us had one life skill. Neither of us had one tool to deal with life. And so, you know, I remember growing up, I felt so distinctly that like everybody had been given this manual of life when they were born. And so like when your heart's broken, page 135, when you have a flat tire, page 74, right? A guide, if you will, to help you. And I felt like when I was born, they were like, sorry, sweet baby, you're going to have to do this one on your own, right? Like that's what it felt like. And that is ultimately what I created for my children as well. That life's hard, but you don't have any tools to deal with it. And so when life is hard and you don't have any tools to deal with it, then the compulsive experiences, whether it's substance, whether it's codependency, whether it's sexual compulsivity, whatever it is, right? When life is hard and you don't have any tools, then that's when the compulsive thinking starts playing.
Wow. Yeah, that's very powerful just to see, because I feel like just you getting to explain that, I'm like, oh, I see now those differences, how they're actually similar, but they played out in different ways. So it's the lack of being equipped, but one was from like you legitimately did not have help. You didn't have help coming. Nobody was there. You were on your own. And then the other side is like, oh, kind of dealing with the unfinished business of like, I'm going to advocate for that little girl that I needed, but not realizing that it's also a lack of equipping because of doing most of the stuff for the, you know what I mean? And then
I think that speaks to the generational piece of this as well, right? Because I think that's oftentimes what happens is the boomerang happens, right? Every single generation, we're going to be what we weren't, what the generation before us wasn't. But the problem is they are at both ends of that spectrum, and wellness, right, is somewhere in the middle. So it's very black and white, whereas we need to be in the gray. But because we don't have the skills based on the way that we were raised to find wellness, to find sort of that middle ground, we just swing the pendulum. And so in traumatized generational family patterns, the boomerang just, you know, it just generationally gets moved.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to see that continue to go back and forth. Yeah. What does it take to find that middle and be able to cultivate really wellness? Like, 'cause it has to be, you have to be so intentional with that. So what have you found in working with clients of how do they find that middle ground? So really this swinging back and forth can stop, at least for one generation, till the next one makes their decisions of what to do.
I think the very, very, very most important part of this is that you have to understand. So let's say I'm a loved one and I'm not using substance or addiction of substance in any way. I have to understand that I am also contributing to this dynamic. I liken it to a dance floor, right? And so if you can think about your family's dance floor and you are all doing this dance of waltzing, right? And everybody on this dance floor seems to waltz. Like, it's beautiful. They love it. They love it. But I'm, as the addict, I don't like waltzing. I've never liked waltzing. It's not my thing. And I get off and I get sober and I get back on. And well, while I'm getting sober, I realize that I like to tango. So you can imagine once I get out of treatment and I get back on this dance floor, I'm tangoing and everybody else is waltzing. Can you imagine for a second what that might look like? right? The message that the waltzing people are telling me is, we want you on on this dance floor, but we want you sober. We're not the problem. You are. You're the one tangoing. I need you to be sober and I need you to start waltzing. But this is the thing, as an addicted loved one, I can't waltz. And so the two options I have is I'm either going to get off the dance floor altogether or I'm going to be high and waltz. Those are the only two options. I cannot get back on this dance floor with y'all and waltz and be sober. So when you look at it from that standpoint, the family waltzing as a whole is the problem. What needs to happen is the addict gets off, the loved ones get off, and we learn a whole new dance that's neither tangoing or waltzing, where we can do it authentically, where we can authentically be who we are. But what is required is for the people that are waltzing to understand that they're part of the dynamic and contributing to the dynamic. And so the first time I meet with a mom, I'm kind of gauging where she is in the stages of change. Is she ready to walk down the path that I didn't try to cause this, I didn't create it, but I am contributing to the dynamic?
Yes. Can you give some examples of what contributing to that dynamic looks like? Because I feel like it can be pretty surprising when you start naming it and being like, this is what this, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I've been doing. So if you could just provide some examples, that'd be great.
So the person on that floor that's tangoing is tangoing for one real reason, and it's because on that dance floor, they feel like a square peg in a round hole. They believe that in order to be loved, seen, that they need to be this ideal version of themselves rather than this authentic version of themselves. If I can use my own family as an example, I didn't know when I did the very best as I could growing up, having my kids grow up, but I parented them to be this ideal version of themselves, right? School moves kids towards being this ideal version of themselves. And it seemed to be okay for my daughter, but it was not okay for my son. And as the world and as society pushed him to be this ideal version of himself, he started to build a lot of shame about, but what about this authentic version? Is it not good enough? Right? Is it not okay? And as he questions that and becomes more of an adult, those questions go away and there's an understanding. I'm not good enough. The squareness of me. I can't be square on this dance floor. And so oftentimes when a mom first comes in, and what that can look like is, let's start looking at the fears in and around the squareness of our children, right? My least favorite word in the whole English language is the word potential. And the reason why it's my least is because you have no idea how many parents I've heard say, well, they're just not reaching their potential. And what I hear them saying is they're just not round enough. They could be round. They're so close to being round, but they still have these square edges, right? And it's the idea that I'm trying to push them into being somebody that they're actually not in order for them to fit on this dance floor. And as loved ones, I've got to examine, why do I want them round? What does it say about me? What shame do I have? Right? What fears do I have around this square version of them? And that's where the work begins.
Wow. Yeah, that's so good, because there's a reason for the behavior. There's always a reason, but it's not until we can look at and get underneath all the things, all the actions, all the behavior, all of that, to see and name and identify what are some of these fears. Because until those get to be identified, they just perpetuate all this whole cycle. And that's so helpful to hear this as an example, because it is very common, and yet it's very hard to spot. We all have blind spots, especially with ourselves. So we need other people to help us see what some of these things are that are contributing to the patterns playing out with our kids and our families, all of that. So this is so helpful.
And we talk about contributing. So I'm contributing by not allowing my child to be square, right? I'm contributing by continuing to send the message, whether it's subconsciously or not, that in order for you to be loved, you need to be round, right? That's how I'm contributing to this thing. And so I say this to a lot of people. You can't be waltzing on your dance floor and be like, oh, he's the problem and I have no responsibility. Right? If he just gets sober, then all of this is going to go away. And the truth is he could get sober, but none of that healing has happened, right? None of that sort of dynamic shifting has happened within the family. And so again, for me, when I got sober, it was either we all got off and learned a new dance or I got off by myself. Like those were the only two options of me being sober. My family saying, I need you on this dance floor waltzing, but you need to be sober is not an option. And with all of the addicts that I've met, it wasn't an option for them either. Not long term.
You have to find, right. Because there has to be a completely new, it's a whole new way of living. It's a whole new way of being. It's a new way of interacting with each other. It's basically deconstructing.
Yes.
All these patterns, you didn't realize that have been built and established for years, decades, and generations that you really have to deconstruct, break apart, and learn a whole new dance. I love this analogy.
Well, I think for family, oftentimes is they want to believe that they aren't the problem, right? Yes. They want to believe that the work is not their responsibility. And that can be true. Like you can stay there and it's okay. I was there and understand it for a bit, but that's not going to lead to long-term happiness, joy, serenity, peace for the family unit.
Right. Yeah. It's so true. Yeah, exactly. Because it's something that's very, just thinking of how scary and overwhelming it can feel to be like, what does this look like to actually, it's terrifying. That's kind of what you were saying. What are these fears underneath? Because we need to start uncovering them. And then you're also in this whole pattern and in addiction. There's so much denial that is like ingrained. So that is very hard to pull yourself out of denial and be like, okay, I'm really going to take an honest look. And it's terrifying. But thankfully, because of you, as someone who walks with families and walks with people through this, they don't have to go through this alone. No. And it doesn't have to feel as overwhelming because you're a guide. So as we're coming to a close here today, I would love it if you could just share where people could find you to connect, what resources you offer for anyone who finds themselves in similar situations and need help.
Yeah, I would love to. So a quick story as we're wrapping up. I remember when I was sober for about 6 months and I was driving in a car with my husband and I was telling him about how exciting my life was and I was meeting all these people and doing all this work and I was feeling peace and serenity. And I looked over at him and he was like deadpanned, his face. And he said, I'm so happy for you. But I've been doing this for 14 years too, and what the hell am I supposed to do? And in that moment, I realized that being a family member of somebody that is either in active addiction or is getting sober is as isolating as it is to be the addict. It is as shameful as it is to be the addict, right? To be the mama or the dad or the cousin or the family member that's going through this. All of a sudden, you have nothing to talk about with your neighbor. Because you are literally in fight or flight every single moment of your life. And how do you just be social, right? Those experiences that my husband had, as the addict, I had resources. I had people that were like, let me come here. We'll help you, right? But my husband, he even searched for people to help and he couldn't find anyone. And so he was all alone and didn't have anybody to talk to about this experience. And so, for about 6 years after I got sober, I worked in the treatment field and I worked with the addict, but there was just this pull that I was having that I could hear God saying to me, Jennifer, walk through all of these different dynamics of this disease, right? Whether it was the granddaughter, the daughter, the addict yourself, the mama, and now in my husband's experience, I need you to go work with people that don't have necessarily the resources that the addict has. And so my website is www.riseaddictionlc, R-I-S-E addiction, the letters lc.com. And some of the services that I provide, I'm very passionate about. I do a coaching call twice a week. And my whole goal for the coaching call is to allow people to find their people. Right? Again, as an addict, I can walk into a room of Alcoholics Anonymous and find my people. And I don't have to articulate my shame or tell you what it feels like to be an addict, because you already know. And so that's what I'm trying to create for loved ones. Is just, and I work with people all over this country that come together. Some of them have even flown to us for retreats because they connect so much with other folks. And that's my main goal, is to take us out of the darkness into the light and find your people. Because I feel very, very, very strongly that if you could heal for this thing by yourself, you would have by now.
Yes, right.
That cave is too dark. There's too many spiders and stalagmites and bats. You know, I could not go in there by myself. What I learned was this thing, connection is the cure to this thing. And I had to find my people to go inside of the cave with me. And then we would back our way out and I would go into one of theirs with them, right? But this is what we're trying to create with these coaching calls. And then the second thing I do is I do individual sessions, again, all over the country by the Zoom, such a great technology that we get to use now, to help people individually start setting goals, right? Or boundaries and expectations, and start dealing with their fears and start untangling this thing, separate to what your addict is doing. I have a lot of clients that have been able to find peace and start building real trust and rapport with their addict, and their addict is still using, as crazy as that sounds. And the work starts with us. And so that's another service that I provide. And then additionally, I do retreats about every 6 months and allow all of us to kind of come together and talk about addiction, but really just connect and do some of that healing. So on my website, www.riseaddictionlc, there's a little part that says, let's work together, and you can hit contact me, and we don't have to even work together. But if you want to reach out, and I'd love to be a resource in your area. If there's, somewhere that you want to find a group in person or something like that. Really, my goal is to just break the chains and stigma of this thing and come together like-minded people that are just trying to heal from addiction.
Wow. Yeah, that's so good. And the work that you're doing and helping, I just think that the people who are not necessarily the substance abusers themselves get so overlooked, right? Yeah. And so just like what you're saying, that it's easy to have all the focus and attention go on the person who is addicted to the very obvious thing with the substance. You're the one who needs to get help, while the other person's like, I have been affected too, and I'm struggling. I need guidance. I need help too. And you are providing a space for that. So that's amazing.
And I think too, how can I contribute to the solution? I know how to contribute to the continued cycle of this thing, right? I've done it for a long time. How do I contribute to the solution? As family members, we are the most influential person in our loved ones' lives, right? So specifically, let's say you have a child that's an addict. I am one of the most influential people in their lives. So how do I start contributing to a solution or moving them closer to a solution than they were yesterday?
Yes. Oh my gosh, it's so good. Yeah, I'm just glad you're doing this work, and these resources are available for anybody who finds themselves in a similar situation. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for being on today, sharing your story and your insights and expertise, as well as where people can go to get the help that they need.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, if this conversation has encouraged you, please share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Thank you so much for listening, friend. I cannot wait to talk with you next time. Thanks for listening to Let's Get Real. If you've been feeling stretched thin, stuck in survival mode, or like you've lost yourself in motherhood, I made something just for you. It's called the Overwhelmed Mom's Guide, and it's totally free. Inside, I walk you through simple steps to help you reconnect with who you are, find a bit more breathing room in your day, and start to feel like you again. You can grab it now. Just click the link in the show notes. You don't have to keep doing this alone. Let's take the next step together.